Tuesday, September 16, 2003.
What is going on in Major League Baseball? A wild card scramble in the National League such as we've never seen.
The only teams that are in the playoff race because of the wild card are the ones that have no business being in.
If the question is the wild card working, I think by and large the wild card is working.
So much strength and power in the game.
That is rocked to right center field.
We will enter a period, I guarantee you, in the next 5 years when people will be writing headlines about the power outage in Major League Baseball.
Does it change the opinion of what somebody should accomplish to get into the Hall of Fame? I think so.
Also, the lesson of Sammy Sosa.
You can do anything in America if you'll say you're sorry.
Tonight, in the first of 2 installments, an all-star panel. Bob Costas, Joe Buck, and George Will discuss the burning issues in baseball outside the lines.
And now, reporting for Outside the Lines, Bob Lee.
No sport inspires more opinion, discussion, even argument than the national pastime. And most right-thinking Americans feel rather proprietary about baseball with opinions to match. Tonight we begin a 2-part look at the burning issues in baseball. And like most good things about the game, it's going to be based on fact but distinguished by opinion. Our panel, a murderer's row of baseball experts. Bob Costas of HBO Sports called baseball for 2 decades on NBC and is also the author of a book on how baseball can get its house in order. Joe Buck is the Emmy Award-winning voice of Major League Baseball for Fox Sports, and George Will is a Pulitzer Prize-winning columnist and a member of the Commissioner's Committee on how to better market the game. Well, guys, as baseball turned into the home stretch beginning of September, 8 teams in the National League, a legitimate shot at the wild card. Joe Buck, you've got roots in a wild card city, St. Louis. What's not to like about the wild card?
Well, first of all, let me say that I feel like somehow Keanu Reeves got an invitation to a party he shouldn't be in, and I'm playing the role of Keanu for your purposes. I'm a guy who's always been in favor of the wild card. I liked it when they introduced it. My opinion on it was that there were too many ballparks as they continued to add teams, too many ballparks in September that were empty with teams that were out of their divisional race, and now you've got it pretty well wide open. Does it water it down? I'm sure we'll talk about that as this segment continues, but to me, when you have that pot at the end of the rainbow sweetened a little bit and you have more teams fighting for a playoff spot, I think whether you get in as a wild card or you get in as a division winner these days, I don't think there's that much of a distinction, and I think it's been exciting for the game.
George, has it helped the game?
I think it has. Last year you had 2 wild card teams in the World Series, and I don't think anyone thought the World Series was diminished thereby. You had the Florida Marlins, a wild card team a few years ago, win the World Series. Think of where we would be today in September 2003 if there weren't wild cards. On September 7th, Sunday, September 7th, 2003, there were 15 Major League games, and only one of them, the Detroit-Toronto game, was without postseason implications. That is very important for baseball because September is a very difficult month for baseball. The NFL starts, college football starts, a number of teams are out of the pennant race. To have as many teams playing meaningful games as possible is what the wild card accomplishes.
Well, Bob Costas sounds like it's working pretty well. Well, to hear a titan of logic like George Will sign on to the 2 + 2 is 5 school is dismaying to me, but it's not going to change my opinion. Part of the problem, if I can just preface it by saying this, part of the problem with this and other baseball issues is that any change, no matter half-baked, is almost always framed as, you agree with this or are you a purist? As if there's only 2 possible choices and there aren't better alternatives. Whether it's expanding the playoffs, realigning the divisions, interleague play, whatever it may be, I have no problem with change as long as the change is an enlightened one. And I think there are ways to even expand on the wild card concept that would be better than what we have in place right now. The problem I have with the wild card, in concept before they ever played a game under it, and today, is that it is fundamentally impossible to have a meaningful race for first place among any of the 3 best teams in the league at any time. What it does is it diminishes the meaning, drama, and clarity of a close race. For example, Red Sox-Yankees the great rivalry. It's a close race as we speak. Take the wild card away, it has real urgency. But the Red Sox lead the wild card race, even as they trail the Yankees. Same thing with Seattle and Oakland. Take the wild card away, it has real urgency. If Oakland or Seattle were to slump, the Yankee-Red Sox race, no matter how close, would have no meaning. As we speak right now, it's 3 divisions rather than the wild card that really has enhanced excitement, because the only teams that are in the playoff race because of the wild card are the ones that have no business being in, because they're double digits behind either Atlanta or San Francisco in their respective divisions. Everybody else who's in the wild card picture would also be in the divisional race.
George?
And that's the other drawback. Let me finish here.
Okay.
That's the other drawback of the wild card, which is that it takes away the high-end drama of a really close race for the division, because the wild card is always more important than winning the division, because it's only with the wild card that elimination is at stake. And then when you have a big lead like Atlanta or San Francisco, it marginalizes that achievement, because if Philadelphia or the Dodgers or the Marlins make the wild card, when the postseason begins, they start on virtually equal footing with a team that has soundly outplayed them over 162 games. Contrast that with football, which plays 1/10 as many games and yet seeds its playoffs in a meaningful way and gives a huge advantage in the postseason to the team that did best during the regular season, and significant disadvantages to those that get in as wild cards.
All right, George, is that 2 and 2 making 5?
That is 2 and 2 making 5, because what he said is that the wild card is taking away from the beautiful clarity of the divisional races, and it seems to me, if you're a real purist, you ought to be opposed to divisions, because that did something to the classic traditional pennant race. Bob, my conservative credentials are in good standing. I'm a constitutional purist, but I'm for the first 10 amendments. They're called the Bill of Rights. We have in the Constitution an amendment provision, because we in America believe we can always make things better.
Yes, and you could make this one better, too, and I'll tell you how. One of 2 ways. The one I would prefer, which won't happen because we're in a watered-down era, short attention span era, more is better no matter what, and people think if you add more fast food to the menu and take the gourmet dishes off, that somehow that's a good thing. So I concede that the one I prefer won't happen, which is to just have the 3 divisions and give the team with the best record of the 3 a first-round bye, and you still have the added round of playoffs, but you haven't watered it down with the wild card. In the absence of that, what I would advocate is having a second wild card and let the 2 wild cards enter on an entirely different tier. Have them play best 2 out of 3 immediately at the end of the season, even if they have to play the Monday after the season ends. If they have to go cross-country, let them play best 2 out of 3, and as soon as you can end that series, have the survivor go to the home field of the division winner with the best record. And in that best of 7 series, not best of 5, which is less of a crapshoot, best of 7 makes more sense, have the team with the best record play the first 3 games at home, 4 and 5 at the wild card, 6 and 7 at the home field of the division winner with the best record, while the other 2 division winners play a standard 2-3-2 best of 7, shorten the season to 154 games, and at least then, if the wild card makes it through, they've earned it, and you've given some kind of standing to regular season achievement.
Joe, chances of that working, being instituted?
I'm so confused right now. It's just not something that I hyperventilate about. Not that Bob is, but I think that, Bob has taken the argument from really one question was, is the wild card working, to now adding a second team as a wild card, which I wouldn't be so opposed to. But, change happens so slowly in Major League Baseball. I think you look back at what Bud Selig has been able to incorporate into this game, and I think the wild card has been a positive. I think if you ask the question, is it a good thing, is it a bad thing, to me, it's been more of a good thing than a bad thing. I think if you get more bodies into the seats in September with more playoff implications across the game of baseball, across the landscape, I think it's been a positive influence on the game. Now, all the other stuff, and this would be, preferable to this, I think Bob makes outstanding points. And I read his book, and I loved his book, and I wish I were smart enough to write a book like that. But if the question is the wild card working, I think, by and large, the wild card is working.
Okay, gentlemen, as we continue, we'll take a look at whether the long ball has distorted the game of baseball. Is there just too much power in the Major League game? We continue with Bob Costas and Joe Buck and George Will. Guys, the proliferation of new and cozy ballparks and bigger and stronger batters. Maris begets McGuire, who begets Bonds. Records fall. George Will, how do we judge what power has done to this game? Has it been a good thing?
Well, I've never really heard a fan leaving the ballpark saying, gosh, that was a boring explosion of home runs. The fans like it, and the fans have another name. They're customers, and there's really nothing wrong with trying to please your customers, particularly if you don't do violence to the basic integrity of the game. Furthermore, if you look at the rhythmic history of Major League Baseball, there are correctives. And we will enter a period, I guarantee you, within the next 5 years when people will be writing headlines about the power outage in Major League Baseball.
Why will that happen?
Well, it'll happen because some guys with big, strong arms, right and left arms, will come along. We had this in 1968. Everyone said, gee, what happened to the hitters? Well, what happened to the hitters were Marichal and Gibson and people like that. They fiddled with the rules of the game then, lowering the mound and all of that. But I do think there are natural rhythms in baseball. But on the basic question, has it ruined the game? Certainly not for those who pay to get in to see it.
Has it, Bob, distorted the game and some of the numbers that we cherish in it?
Yeah, I think it's distorted it somewhat, and it's thrown the historical frame of reference out of whack. Prior to 1995, there were 18 50-home run seasons in the whole history of baseball, and 4 of them belonged to Babe Ruth. There have been only 2 or 3 from 1961 until the mid-90s. There have been 18 50-home run seasons in the 6 or 7 years since then, with more sure to come, and many of those performances came by players who were in the major leagues in the late 80s and early 90s. Certainly they were good players, but their numbers only exploded with the confluence of circumstances that you outlined. Players being juiced is a big one that came to a head in the mid-90s and beyond. And so, although there are many, many great players today, I don't know exactly how to evaluate their statistical performances alongside their predecessors in the Hall of Fame.
What are then, Joe, the new parameters for the Hall of Fame? And also George's idea that we're going to see a new crop of big, strong pitchers come along. Can they shut them down in these new, tiny, little, cozy bandboxes?
Well, I think it does happen in cycles. I agree, actually, with both Bob and George. I think you will see, I'm sure, a slowing down of the home runs during some cycle coming up. But every advantage is tilted toward the hitter, whether it's the lax drug testing policies, whether it's the smaller ballparks, the pitching mound. I think more than anything, it's the strike zone. And, you know, they continue to fiddle with the strike zone. The bottom line is it's too small. Pitchers have to set a ball on a tee, and these guys are so big and strong now. The ballparks are so small that they continue to hit the ball out of the ballpark. Does it change the opinion of what somebody should accomplish to get into the Hall of Fame? I think so. I mean, you start to look at some of the guys that are either right on the verge of hitting 500 home runs or just over that threshold, and I think that it is starting to change when you compare what guys do in this era compared to what guys did in past eras. And to me, 500 home runs should no longer be an automatic ticket to Cooperstown because of the way balls are flying out of the ballpark. I think you have to recalibrate that. What the number is, you know, there was never any steadfast rule that 500 was the number. It just became that. Maybe it becomes 600, maybe it becomes 550, I don't know. But I do think it has changed the way people look at career statistics with regard to power numbers.
But we're going to see the same thing with regard to pitching. Since we went from a 4-man to a 5-man rotation, fewer starts, fewer victories, fewer people getting to 250, 275, 300 wins. And people know how to adjust and make the basic comparison, Joe, you're talking about, which is how someone ranks compared to his era. That's still the way to do it.
Yeah, for example, George and Joe, I think you both make excellent points. I'm just picking these 2 names out of thin air with no disrespect intended toward the second one. Al Kaline doesn't have anything like the career numbers of, let's say, Rafael Palmeiro. But Al Kaline was a much more significant player in the context of his time than Rafael Palmeiro is now, given the context. Look at it another way. I find it hard to believe that in the whole history of baseball, the only people capable of hitting 400 under equal conditions were white guys born either before the turn of the century or shortly thereafter. I think maybe Tony Gwynn or Rod Carew or some others might have done it under different circumstances. And I think, too, that if you took the Mickey Mantle of 1956 or the Willie Mays of 1965, who each hit over 50 home runs, and let them try that in 1998 or 2001, there might have been a different record for Mark McGwire or Barry Bonds to shoot at.
Joe, you mentioned the strike zone, which brings up what they've tried to do this year with Questec. A little bit of automation. We've seen how some of the umpires have adjusted to it and not adjusted to it and reacted to it. You're out at the ballparks. By season's end, Questec, thumbs up, thumbs down?
I think right now it's thumbs down, and that's really a change for me. I was very much in favor of Major League Baseball trying to corral these umpires to call a more uniform strike zone, but I was for it if it meant that more strikes were going to be called. And I think that's the major way, the best way to speed up these games. They try all these different things. The bottom line is there aren't enough strikes called in these games to get these things happening faster. Obviously, the inconsistencies with how the strikes and balls are called in a Questec park as opposed to how they're called in a non-Questec park, that should even be a consideration when you go into a ball game. And I think about that when I'm sitting in the booth for a Tom Glavine start. Are we in a Questec ballpark? Are we not? The statistics are weighted one way to the other. Glavine in a Questec ballpark doesn't win because they don't give the corners of the strike zone. And I think in years past, you said, well, it got ridiculous with the guys in Atlanta, Maddox and Glavine. You think of the Eric Gregg game against the Marlins in the playoffs and some of the Livan Hernandez strikes that were almost a foot outside. I think that's where all this started. It's fine to narrow it, but you don't seem to get the high strike as much as they wanted to talk about a couple of years ago, and you don't get the low strike, which is what they're pleading with these umpires to call, because that's really the only pitch that these benches can see if they're high or low. And if they call the low strike, which is what they want them to do, they just get pounded on by these dugouts. So what you're getting is fewer strikes called. Even though the statistics might not back it up, I don't care. It just has not, in my mind, accomplished what they wanted, which is to get these games happening faster by guys calling strikes more. It just doesn't happen.
Well, let's talking about the strike zone, back to the power issue. The one thing we alluded to it earlier, the one issue we haven't talked about, the possibility or the use, if you believe some former players, of steroids. Bob, to what extent do you think, say a year, 18 months ago, before the attention was riveted on it, there might have been usage of enhancements like that?
I'm going to discount the Ken Caminiti's and the Jose Cansecos who may have agendas and who may not be that credible. Let's go with a solid baseball citizen. Tony Gwynn, 2 or 3 years ago, told me that he thought 30 to 40% of non-pitchers in baseball at that time had used some sort of muscle-building substance. Now, some of those substances would probably be legal even under an improved drug testing system, creatine or whatever it may be. But others either are steroids or come pretty close to mimicking the effects of steroids, and it's very, very obvious. Look at the body types. Look at a game on ESPN Classic, not from the 50s, but from the late 80s or early 90s. It's as if an entire new species suddenly came about in the space of just a few years. Who's kidding who here?
Testing, George, is it working? Could this new testing work?
Well, a testing regime can be devised, and with the permission of the Players Association, can be implemented. I don't know the details, but it's obviously not beyond the wit of man to devise this. What's important is to understand the line you're trying to draw, and that it's not an absolutely clear line. There's a line to be drawn between things that enhance the body's normal functioning and chemical substances that change the body's normal functioning. We don't want to have someone saying, my chemistry set beat your chemistry set. They want to say, my performance beat your performance. So it is terribly important in baseball, with its fixation, and that's a wholesome one, on records and the cumulative statistics, not to have an entire generation of fans begin to look askance and say, these records today are meaningless, because it is the very conversation about records and the rich arguments about intergenerational comparisons of records that drives the game's popularity, which is why the whole drug testing issue goes to the marketability, if you will, of the game.
All right, now we're going to move along to the next topic. Next up, he was caught with cork. It became Stop the Press's news. We're going to consider whether Sammy Sosa has completed his image rehab.
A mistake, I know that. I feel sorry. I just, apologize to everybody that in Paris.
It was over 3 months ago that Sammy Sosa's bat shattered, and to some, so did his hard-won image as the game's reigning goodwill ambassador. Bob, has he repaired the damage from that evening?
I don't know that he's repaired it totally, but in the present sports climate, when you see all kinds of misdeeds by people being trumpeted everywhere, or at least exposed everywhere, I think people put it in a different light, and they say, you know, pitchers have cheated by nicking the ball or whatever over time, and in competitive sports, especially at the professional level, you look for any edge, and while they don't approve of it, they certainly don't want to burn him at the stake for it.
Joe, did players initially believe his explanation, gee, I didn't know my bat was corked?
No. I think that's ridiculous to think that anybody would believe that you know, some alien put it in his hands, or it's the one time that he went up to the plate with a corked bat, and then it happened to break that time, and had it not broken, it would have never been used again. But I agree with Bob, and I think Bob makes a great point, that with all the stuff going on around sports and these athletes, you know, I'm more the hysterical type. I did the game right after that Saturday. I said at the time, though, it would be interesting to see how he responds on the field, and the best way he can rehabilitate his image is by hitting home runs, which is what he did throughout the month of July. He had a fantastic July, and I think people have, for the most part, really forgotten about it.
So pull your team, George, back into a pennant race, and all is forgiven in this fine country of ours.
Well, it's not, no, that's not the secret. The secret, and I wish people in Washington could learn this, and political consultants are going to have their politicians study the Sosa incident. You can do anything in America if you'll say you're sorry. Sammy's bat exploded in the first inning. He's immediately thrown out. By the third inning, he's on the phone from the clubhouse to Bud Selig, expressing remorse for the embarrassment caused to himself, the Cubs baseball, and the commissioner personally. Major League Baseball quickly seizes the bats, x-rays the bats, x-rays the 5 at the Hall of Fame, x-rays those that are on tour, to find that indeed all the evidence doesn't confirm but tends to support what Sammy has said, that this was an aberrant behavior, an aberrant bat, and arguably I still believe a mistake. But that is by his remorse, the swiftness with which everybody moved, you have a case study in crisis management.
Yeah, Bob, I think most people don't accept Sammy's explanation of this particular incident, like Joe said, but most people believe that overall this wasn't typical, and that the vast majority of his home runs were hit under legitimate circumstances.
But these guys never go to the plate with a bat in their hands if they don't know what that bat's all about.
Of course not. Who would use a lighter bat in batting practice and then a heavier bat in the game? That's crazy.
Well, yeah. Sammy said he was sorry. I want to say I thank you very much, gentlemen. Bob Costas, Joe Buck, George Will, thanks for joining us. And next, a Storylines update on a former pro football player who had a life of giving back. Baseball triple-header Wednesday on ESPN, beginning with the Mets and the Cubs at Wrigley, 2:15 Eastern. And right after SportsCenter at 7 Eastern, the Marlins and the Phillies, a critical wild card matchup. Then the Diamondbacks visiting L.A. to take on the Dodgers at 10 Eastern, 7 Pacific. 3 games Wednesday on ESPN. We'll see you tomorrow night over on ESPN2 at 12 midnight Eastern, 9 p.m. Pacific with Outside the Lines Nightly. I'm Bob Lee.
Outside the Lines is a presentation of ESPN, the worldwide leader in sports. For more, log on to ESPN.com.